Everyone thinks revenge starts with anger. Mine started with a paintbrush. Not clenched fists or screaming matches, just a canvas, an empty house, and a man everyone had already forgotten. At 68, I was invisible. Not just to strangers, but to my own children. A ghost that refilled the sugar jar and nodded through their condescension. But ghosts remember. And some ghosts learn how to paint. They used to call me Dad with warmth. Now it was Walter, when they even bothered to call at all. Michelle, my daughter, once asked if I was still doing those little pictures. As if art were a phase I should have outgrown by now, like acne or optimism. My son, Brian, had stopped pretending years ago. It's just clutter, Dad, he once said, gesturing toward my stack of sketchbooks like they were moldy newspapers. Why don't you take up golf or something? I had a dream once. Not the delusional kind where I thought I'd be hanging next to Van Gogh or Basquiat, but something humbler. I wanted to paint the quiet things that mattered, sunlight through curtains, the tilt of Linda's head when she listened, the feel of dust dancing in lamplight. But life is greedy. It steals time in increments so small you don't notice until the day you wake up and realize the brush has dried out in your hand. I spent 42 years at Miller Hydraulics welding steel, soaking my hands in grease and overtime. My art lived in the cracks between shifts, tucked into the corners of Sunday mornings and sleepless nights. Linda, God, Linda, she believed in it. When we couldn't afford easels, she bought plywood from the hardware store and laid it out with care. Your hands were made for this, she told me once, holding them like they were scripture. She was the only one who saw me. When cancer took her, the world dimmed. The walls of the house echoed in strange ways, and even silence seemed louder without her breath beside mine. I didn't touch a paintbrush for months. The last thing I painted before she passed was a window she loved, late autumn light spilling through sheer curtains, pooling on the hardwood like honey. It still hangs in the hallway. Michelle once walked past it and said, "Oh, is that from a catalog?" I didn't correct her. What would have been the point? Grief has a shape, and it fit me like a second skin. The kids came around less. Michelle brought her husband, Craig, once. He chuckled at one of my paintings and said, "That's interesting. I wouldn't hang it in my garage, but hey, art's subjective, right?" Michelle laughed too. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn after decades of swallowing your pride without water. Later that night, I stared at that painting, Linda in the kitchen, her back to me, hair up in a loose bun, steam curling from a pot on the stove, and I nearly tore it in half. But I couldn't. It was the last time I remembered her before the pain. Before the hospital smell. Before the silence. That was the moment something cracked, not shattered, not yet, but cracked. A hairline fracture in the polite facade I'd been holding up for years. A week later, I found her old sewing room. I hadn't opened the door since the funeral. Dust clung to everything, but her scent still lingered faintly, lavender and mothballs. Her sewing machine sat quiet in the corner, draped in a cover she stitched herself. I stood there for a long time, then started clearing it out. Not gently. I boxed the thread, the fabrics, the half-finished projects. I didn't cry. I told myself I was making room for something new. Something that might bring her back in a different form. By the next morning, I had a fold-out table in the center of the room and a blank canvas staring me down. My fingers hesitated at first. They'd grown stiff, slower. But the moment I laid the first streak of oil across the white, it felt like blood returning to a numb limb. At first, I tried landscapes again. Old habits. But they didn't feel honest anymore. The trees came out angry. The skies looked bruised. I gave up on pretending. I began painting people, my people. Not as they are, but as they feel to me. Michelle's eyes were glass marbles, reflecting only herself. Craig had a grin stretched too wide, filled with gold teeth and dollar signs. Brian? His face was smeared with fog, as if he were trying to disappear even from his own reflection. It didn't feel like therapy. It felt like confession. And I didn't stop. Each painting lived in that locked room. I didn't share them. I didn't need to. The work was for me. And Linda. I imagined her watching, arms folded, amused but proud. Took you long enough, I could almost hear her say. The rest of the house became a husk. I barely left the studio. I ate when I remembered to. I slept when the brush slipped from my fingers. For the first time in decades, I was living for something that didn't ask for approval. That didn't require applause. It was revenge, yes, but not in the way they'd recognize. My children had buried me before I was dead. I was just painting my way back to the surface. Michelle said she wanted to do a family dinner. That's what she called it, a little reunion, as if we were estranged cousins and not the man who changed her diapers and taught her how to ride a bike. She texted the invite, not even a call. Hey Dad, Craig and I are hosting a little thing at the house. Thought it'd be nice to get everyone together. You in? You in? Like I was the punchline to a group chat joke. I agreed, mostly out of habit. Maybe a piece of me still hoped someone would meet me halfway, see past the quiet, wrinkled shell and remember the man I used to be. I spent the whole afternoon deciding what to bring. I settled on a painting, a portrait of Michelle from a photo Linda had taken at her college graduation. Michelle had been laughing, head thrown back, the tassel of her cap catching the wind. Her joy had been unfiltered then, before the mortgages and the business casual tone of her voice. That version of her was worth remembering. It was one of my best pieces. Soft strokes for her hair, a palette that whispered rather than shouted. I even varnished it that morning, just enough to give it life without gloss. I wrapped it carefully, not in gaudy gift paper, but in brown craft paper tied with twine, elegant, simple, honest. Craig's house was exactly what you'd expect from a man who used the word networking more than hello. Granite countertops, wine rack filled with bottles no one actually drank, a living room curated for Instagram, not comfort. The walls were pale gray and empty. Soulless. I handed Michelle the package when I arrived. She tilted her head. What's this? Something I made, I said. For you. She smiled, polite, practiced, politician grade. You didn't have to, Dad. I didn't say anything. Just watched her carry it to the kitchen island, set it down, and move on. No urgency to open it. No curiosity. Dinner was tight smiles and tighter pants. Brian showed up late with a Bluetooth earpiece still in, barely acknowledged me before sitting down and scrolling through his phone like it owed him something. Craig passed around overpriced wine and talked about their new vacation plans, just a week in the Caymans, nothing crazy. Michelle nodded along, laughing in perfect intervals. No one asked about me. No one asked how I was coping with 2 years of silence and Linda's ghost still lingering in every corner of my house. Dessert came. Cheesecake that Craig sourced from a local culinary artist, as if it were an oil painting. That's when Michelle finally remembered the package. Oh, she said, lifting it from the counter. I almost forgot. She unwrapped it with one hand, fork still in the other. I watched her face as the paper fell away, waiting for something, recognition, warmth, anything. She blinked. It's me. I nodded. From your graduation. Linda took the photo. She tilted the painting to show Craig. He squinted, then smirked. Wow. That's bold. Michelle laughed. Not a giggle. A real, sharp, cut-glass laugh. I mean, it's good, Dad, but I don't know where we'd hang it. Maybe in the garage. Or the laundry room. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. My mouth opened, then closed. Brian looked up from his phone just long enough to say, "You're still doing these?" These. Like they were finger paintings. Craig leaned back, wine glass in hand. Hey, maybe we should start a collection. Get them framed, sell them on Etsy or something. Sad dads of suburbia. Everyone laughed. Everyone but me. I stared at the painting. Michelle's smile, captured in warm light. Her eyes bright, free. The version of her she no longer recognized. And now they were mocking it. Mocking her without even realizing it. I thought it might be meaningful, I said quietly. My voice barely carried over the sound of their laughter. Michelle waved a hand. It is. We're minimalists now, you know. Clean space, clean mind. I wanted to ask what was clean about pretending your father's love was clutter. I wanted to stand up, take the painting, and walk out. But I didn't. I just sat there, fork untouched on my plate, cheesecake melting into a blur. The rest of the night moved in slow motion. I answered a few questions when asked, nodded when prompted. When it was time to leave, Michelle gave me a side hug. Craig didn't bother standing. The painting stayed on the kitchen counter, propped against the backsplash like an Amazon package no one had the energy to open. I walked to my car alone. Inside, the engine purred, headlights slicing through the dark. But I didn't drive. I just sat there, gripping the wheel. That's when it started. Not rage, something colder. A stillness that settled deep in my chest, deeper than sadness. A clarity. The same kind of clarity I used to get just before the first stroke on a fresh canvas. That was the night I decided they didn't get to define me anymore. They could have their granite kitchens and curated dinner parties. They could mock my brushstrokes, my grief, my memories. But they'd forgotten something important. I don't need their approval. I have a key. I have a room. And I have a lifetime of paint. The night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked the way it always had since Linda passed, like it missed being alive. I sat in the armchair by the window, listening to the wind rattle the siding, and I couldn't stop picturing that painting. Michelle, unwrapped and exposed on a kitchen counter, reduced to a joke between wine sips. Her face, my work, treated like clutter, like kitsch. It was worse than throwing it away. At least the garbage gets taken seriously. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I stood up and walked to the hallway. The door to her sewing room was still closed, untouched since I'd cleared it out. I had cleaned the walls but never painted them. The sun had yellowed one side of the room from years of quiet use, and her thread rack still left faint outlines on the wall, little ghost pegs of where things used to be. I turned the knob, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. The light fixture flickered like it always had. Linda used to slap the base to get it to behave. I did the same, out of habit, and it steadied. The old table I'd dragged in was still there, covered in a canvas drop cloth. I hadn't painted since that night a month ago. The brushes were stiff. The palette dry. The room smelled like dust and linseed oil, but also like something older. Memory. Grief. A version of myself I wasn't ready to abandon. I sat in the chair, listening to the silence. Then I pulled the cloth away. The last painting stared back at me. It wasn't Michelle. It wasn't Craig or Brian. It was a mirror. Not literal, but a self-portrait in shadows. A man hunched in a chair, surrounded by voices shaped like knives, his own hands tied in vines of old photographs and birthday cards. His mouth sewn shut with red thread. I didn't remember painting it, not fully. I must have done it in one of those dazes when time slips sideways. But it stopped me cold. Because it wasn't just pain. It was hunger. The kind that doesn't want food, it wants truth. That was the night I understood what this room was for. This wasn't a studio for landscapes or flower bowls. It wasn't for anything polite. This was my confessional, and the next canvas was going to be the first real sermon. I cleared the table and primed a fresh canvas. My hands were slower than they used to be, joints crackling like leaves, but once the first stroke landed, the muscle memory returned. I didn't start with faces. I started with weight. Broad shapes, hunched postures, exaggerated limbs. I painted Michelle first. Not as she is, but as she acts. Her smile pulled too wide, teeth replaced by tiny mirrors, each one reflecting her own face. Her fingers were elongated, grasping at things that weren't there: attention, approval, relevance. Around her neck, I painted a necklace of golden hashtags. Not jewelry, labels. Hashtag driven. Hashtag minimalist. Hashtag blessed. The canvas pulsed with satire. It was cruel, and it was honest. Next came Craig. His suit was made of dollar bills. His hands held a glass of wine that never emptied, and his tongue was forked, not in the demonic sense, but in the used car salesman sense. Each time I painted his smile, I made it wider, until it split his face in two. One eye looked at Michelle. The other at a mirror. Behind him, I painted tiny hands reaching up, mine, I think, offering a painting. Craig ignored them. I worked until sunrise, then fell asleep on the floor, curled in a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender. That became the new rhythm. By day, I shuffled through errands and nodded at neighbors. But every evening, after the world stopped expecting me to exist, I returned to the studio. I painted like a man possessed. Greed. Vanity. Cruelty. The canvases filled with symbolic exaggeration. Brian appeared as a faceless suit, his head a glowing screen, notifications pinging from his chest while he texted through every human connection. One painting showed a family dinner where everyone wore headphones and $8 bills. Another featured a child walking away from a cradle, dragging their aging father behind them like forgotten luggage. I began stacking the finished pieces along the far wall. There was no order to them, no plan. Just a growing gallery of truths too raw to say aloud. Each painting took a piece of something I didn't know I still carried. I thought of Linda often, not just as memory, but as anchor. She used to say, "Paint what you can't speak." I'd shrugged it off, back then. But now. Now I understood. One night, after finishing a piece where Michelle stood at a podium preaching into a crowd of mannequins, I sat down and stared at the wall of faces I'd created. It looked like a courtroom. And I was both the witness and the accused. The room had changed. No longer dusty, forgotten. Now it breathed. The air hung thick with turpentine and resentment. I'd taped newspaper over the window, not to keep light out, but to keep them out. Their voices. Their judgment. Their rewrites of my story. This was my rewrite. I began giving the paintings titles. The Virtue Auction. The Son Who Sold Silence. Family Values, EST 1982, expired 2019. They weren't subtle. They weren't meant to be. I was no longer painting to please. I was painting to reveal. And every canvas was one step closer to something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it, like a storm brewing in the bones before it breaks the sky. I wasn't hiding anymore. But I was waiting. Waiting for someone to see what I'd made, and finally understand what they'd created. It was the creak of the gate that gave her away. Not loud, just enough to break the trance I'd slipped into. I had the brush suspended mid-air, a long crimson stroke waiting to complete itself, when I heard it, the soft metallic scrape of rusted hinges. I froze, listening. No one ever came to the side yard. The garden had gone to seed, the stepping stones half swallowed by weeds. I hadn't touched it since Linda died. I set the brush down, wiped my hands on a paint-streaked rag, and moved to the window. The newspaper I'd taped over the glass peeled slightly at the top corner, so I peeled it back just enough to peek. She was young, maybe 19, 20 at most. Shoulder-length brown hair, canvas messenger bag slung over one side, earbuds hanging from her shirt collar. She wasn't wandering. She knew where she was. She stood in the middle of my yard like someone approaching a temple they weren't sure they were allowed to enter. I stepped quietly into the hallway and opened the back door. She spun at the sound, startled, clutching the strap of her bag like it might shield her. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to trespass," she said quickly. "I thought this place was empty." "It's not." Her eyes landed on the paint smudges on my clothes. Then the streak of red on my arm. Then the faint scent of turpentine drifting out from behind me. Are you the artist?" she asked. The question threw me. No one had called me that in years. Hell, I hadn't even called myself that. I nodded. Her posture shifted, less defensive, more alert, like a dog catching a scent. "I'm sorry, I probably seem crazy. I live 2 houses down. My grandma is in the white duplex." She pointed vaguely through the hedges. "I've seen the light from this room sometimes at night. The weird glow through the newspaper." I thought, well, I hoped it was something. She hesitated. "I go to the art college across town. We don't get a lot of authentic work around here." That word again. Authentic. It made my stomach tighten. "Look," she said, "if I'm overstepping, just say so. But, is there any chance I could see what you're working on?" My first instinct was no. Absolutely not. The studio wasn't ready. The pieces were personal. Raw. Vindictive, even. They weren't meant to be seen, at least not like this, by some stranger who might walk away and tell the neighborhood there's a lunatic with a vendetta and an easel. But I opened the door wider. Something about her didn't feel like a stranger. I watched her step past me, her shoes crunching softly on the dusty hardwood. The moment she crossed into the room, the air changed. Her breath caught audibly. Her fingers hovered over her lips. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't laughing. She was staring. The painting on the easel, Inheritance, depicted a faceless child tugging a wagon filled with portraits, each one broken, cracked, or blank. Behind them loomed a wall of blurred adult figures, hands outstretched, grasping but never reaching. The colors were violent. The shapes jagged. Her eyes didn't blink. She turned slowly, taking in the rest. Virtue auction. Gold teeth and empty hands. #blessed. And then she did something I wasn't ready for. She sat down. Right there on the studio floor, like someone kneeling at the altar of something sacred. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. This is real." I said nothing. She looked up at me, and I saw the shimmer in her eyes. "I've spent 2 years being taught how to paint like everyone else. You know. Technique. Composition. Light theory. But this," she gestured toward the wall of grotesque family portraits. "This is what none of them teach. This is the stuff they tell us to sanitize." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "And what exactly do you think this is?" She hesitated. Then, truth. Ugly, uncomfortable truth. But it's alive. You painted emotion, not people. That was when I exhaled for the first time in weeks. She stood slowly and approached the easel. "You should show these," she said. "Like, really show them. People need to see this." I shook my head. No one wants to see their worst traits staring back at them. "Maybe not your family," she said carefully. "But strangers? People who don't know you. They'd eat this up. This is Goya-level brutality. Francis Bacon meets suburban decay. It's incredible." The compliment didn't quite register. I was too distracted by the vulnerability of the moment. A stranger, barely out of adolescence, had walked into my grief and seen it not as a breakdown, but as a body of work. She pulled out her phone. "No," I said sharply. "No photos." "Sorry." She lowered it immediately. "I wasn't going to post them. I want to remember this. Honestly, you should let me post one. Anonymously. No names. No location. Just the work." I stared at her. "I promise. I'll crop everything. Just one. Let the world get a glimpse." I should have said no. But the image of that painting gathering dust in silence, of all of them fading into the drywall, was worse than the risk. I nodded. She took the photo like someone disarming a bomb, slow, reverent, deliberate. Then she turned to me. "What name should I give the artist?" "None," I said. She grinned. "Come on. Even Banksy picked something." I thought for a moment. Then, "Lazarus." She blinked. "Like, the guy from the Bible?" "Yeah," I said. "The one who came back." It started with a ping. Then another. And another. Notifications weren't something I got much of, mostly junk mail and weather alerts. But my old phone lit up like it was being exorcised. I squinted at the screen. One unread message from a number I didn't recognize. "Check this out. You're trending. Tessa." Tessa. That was her name, the girl from the art college. She'd told me before she left, but I'd barely retained it. My mind had been swirling too much to hang on to new details. Still, the message confused me. Trending. I clicked the link she sent. It opened to a tweet, just an image and a caption. The image was of my painting, The Virtue Auction. Cropped perfectly, just as she promised. No names. No location. But unmistakable. The colors, the sharp outlines, the rage bleeding through every brushstroke. The caption was simple. Someone's grandfather has been quietly painting the brutal truth of modern family life. No notes. Just honesty. Underneath, 37 likes. I blinked. Refreshed. By the time I finished my coffee and returned to the page, it had grown to over 600. By lunch, it was over 3,000. That night, it passed 20,000. The comments flooded in like a storm. "This hits too close to home. It's like Francis Bacon meets Thanksgiving dinner. My dad was like this. I wish he painted instead of drank. Who is this Lazarus guy? I need more. I'd hang this in my living room today. Modern Goya. Fight me." I sat there in the studio, surrounded by the portraits no one had ever seen, and felt something I hadn't in years. Validation. Not from family. Not from friends. From strangers. But honest ones. People who didn't owe me politeness or sugar-coated pity. They saw the truth in the brushstrokes and didn't flinch. I wasn't a ghost anymore. Tessa texted again. "It's going viral. You don't have a website or socials, do you?" I typed back, clumsily. "No." A pause. "I can build something for you. A portfolio. Just the art. No bio, no photos. You're Lazarus now, remember?" I stared at her message for a long time. Then I wrote. "Do it." 2 days later, a simple site was live. Lazarus Paintings. Art. Black background. White text. High-res images of 5 of my paintings. Titles only. No descriptions. Each one carefully photographed under her supervision. She handled the uploads, the formatting, even the submissions to a few underground art blogs. I didn't understand half of it. But I trusted her. She believed in the work in a way no one had in decades. The next morning, I woke to an inbox full of inquiries. Are these for sale? We'd like to feature Lazarus in our zine. This reminds me of Jenny Saville's early work. We're curating a show about emotional violence in domestic settings. Lazarus would be a perfect fit. It didn't stop. Every time I refreshed, there was more. Artists. Students. Therapists. Even strangers just pouring their own stories into the message box, children of narcissists, victims of gaslighting, parents pushed aside by ungrateful kids. I sat on the studio floor one night, reading message after message, and realized something painfully clear. This wasn't about me anymore. The paintings were mine, but the pain they exposed. Universal. I painted for myself. But others saw their own reflections in the brushwork. Their own families. Their own betrayals. My grotesques were their ghosts too. And Lazarus was becoming a movement. Still, I kept it secret. Brian called that week to check in. Michelle sent a text with a blurry photo of a new patio chair she bought. Craig sent an email about digital asset estate planning, asking if I'd considered what would happen to my IP after I passed. None of them knew. They hadn't connected the dots yet. Even when a podcast dedicated an episode to Lazarus and the rise of emotional brutalism, they didn't notice. Why would they? They didn't look outside their curated bubbles. They thought art only mattered if it came with a pedigree. And I was content with the anonymity. For now. The paintings kept coming. The son who ghosted. Mirrors for eyes. Inheritance, PT2. Each one darker. Bolder. Less metaphor, more accusation. The final strokes weren't always paint. I began attaching fabric, scraps of Linda's old sewing, a tie Craig left here once, one of Brian's baby socks I found buried in a drawer. I wasn't just painting their sins. I was building monuments to them. Tessa came by almost every evening now, usually after her classes. She never overstayed, never asked too many questions. Just sat quietly, sketching in her pad or photographing the latest canvas. One night, she set down her camera and asked, "Do they know?" "Who?" "Your family." I paused. "No," I said. "Not yet." She nodded. "Are you scared for when they do?" I looked at her, the rawness in her question matching the rawness I felt inside. "No," I said slowly. "I'm not scared." Then I glanced at the wall, dozens of painted eyes staring back at me. "I'm waiting." The email came just after sunrise. I'd been sitting in the kitchen nursing the same lukewarm mug of coffee for an hour, staring out at the frost-covered garden. Linda would have hated how overgrown the hedges had become. The tulip beds were buried under dead leaves, and the porch light flickered like a dying memory. But I didn't move. I just sat there with the ache in my hands, the itch in my bones that told me I needed to paint again soon. Then the ding. A new message. Subject, Gallery Inquiry, Lazarus Collection. I nearly deleted it, assuming it was another pop-up scam. But the name in the signature caught my eye. Oriel Gray, Curator Anvil and Ash Gallery. The name rang a bell, not from my world, but from Tessa's. She'd once mentioned it in passing while flipping through a photography book, calling it the underground cathedral of brutal realism. A place that didn't do landscapes or still lives. They showcased work that made people uncomfortable, and proud of it. I opened the email. "Dear Lazarus. We've been following your anonymous work with great interest. The emotional severity and unapologetic tone of your portraits has sparked meaningful conversation within our collective. We'd be honored to showcase your work in our winter exhibition, Unveiled, Art Without Permission. Your anonymity will be respected, but we would require permission to display 6 to 10 original pieces. We can provide transport and secure storage, and all sales will be directed through an anonymous auction format. Please let us know if you're willing to discuss further. Warm regards. Oriel Gray." Curator, Anvil and Ash Gallery. I read it 3 times. My hand hovered over the mouse, uncertain whether to forward it to Tessa or shut the laptop entirely. The idea of putting the paintings into a public space rattled something in me. They weren't just paintings. They were confessions. Indictments. Ghosts trapped in pigment and canvas. Putting them on a wall where strangers could sip wine and analyze brushstrokes like symbols in a novel, it felt like betrayal. And yet, wasn't that the point? To hold the mirror higher. To show them, all of them, what they'd tried so hard to pretend wasn't there. I called Tessa. She answered on the first ring. I didn't even say hello. Just, they want to exhibit them. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, who? Anvil and Ash. There was an audible gasp. You're not joking. No. She was quiet for a beat. What did you say? I haven't replied yet. Tessa came over that night. She brought a bottle of wine she couldn't legally drink and a folder of printouts about the gallery. She spoke fast, too fast, excited in that way young people get when something matters. She told me Oriel Gray had built her reputation on giving voice to the invisible, the discarded, the broken. She said the gallery wasn't about fame, it was about confrontation. Truth. Lazarus belongs there, she said. You belong there. We spent the evening laying out the pieces, choosing which ones could stand on their own, which ones spoke best in sequence. I was hesitant about a few. One in particular, Sanctuary is a Lie, was especially cruel. It depicted a family dinner scene where the father figure sat chained to his chair, smiling through bleeding gums, while the children passed judgment like communion wafers. The symbolism was heavy. Personal. You don't have to show all of them, Tessa said gently. I do, I replied. She looked at me and nodded. The next morning, I replied to Oriel. I gave her permission. We agreed on 8 paintings. I signed the documents under the name Lazarus, and that was that. 2 weeks later, a black truck arrived. 2 handlers stepped out, gloves already on, speaking in soft tones like the house was sacred. They didn't ask questions. Just wrapped each canvas with reverence, carefully slotting them into the padded crates. I stood by the doorway, silent, watching years of silence and resentment be boxed up and labeled. When they were done, the taller one, Cal, I think, turned to me and said, you know, this stuff. It's not just good. It's needed. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't know how to respond. So I nodded. The opening night was 3 days later. I didn't plan to go. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers analyzing my demons like they were party conversation made me nauseous. But Tessa insisted. You can go in disguise, she said. They don't know your face. Just blend in. You need to see this, Walter. Walter. That name didn't feel like mine anymore. Still, I rented a cheap charcoal gray suit and let her pin a Lazarus lapel onto the collar. We took the train into the city. The gallery was tucked between a shuttered bookstore and an old brick coffee shop, the windows fogged with condensation and mystery. Inside, it was dim. Spotlights illuminated the canvases. People moved slowly through the space, whispering, as if too much noise would disrupt the honesty on the walls. Each of my paintings had a placard. No price. No backstory. Just a title. And still, they stared like pilgrims in a sacred space. I stood in the back, hands clasped behind me. An older woman sniffled audibly at Mirrors for Eyes. A man in his 30s took a photo of #blessed, then muttered to his partner, it's like looking at my sister's Instagram, but under a microscope of guilt. Even the critics were there. I recognized one from a magazine Tessa had shoved in my face months ago. He was nodding at Inheritance, PT2, taking furious notes. And then I heard it, soft applause. A group of people had gathered around. Sanctuary is a lie. Someone was explaining it to another. I turned to leave, heart pounding, chest tight, when a woman near the entrance caught my eye. Michelle. She was there. With Craig. They hadn't seen me. But I saw the moment they recognized themselves in the paintings. Her face paled. His mouth opened just slightly. They didn't laugh this time. They didn't even blink. They stared. And I walked out before the scream inside them could reach the surface. I should have left the gallery that night and never looked back. Slipped out like a ghost, let the whispers behind me grow without ever turning around to claim them. But I didn't. I walked 2 blocks to a diner, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and waited until I knew the reception was over. Then I went back. Not to be seen, just to see. The gallery was dimmer now, the crowd thinner, but the heat of the evening still lingered in the air. The room hummed with the low murmur of afterthoughts. Most people had drifted off to late dinners or whispered debates over wine, but a few remained. I stayed outside in the shadows, eyes fixed on the front window where my painting, Inheritance, PT2, still held court. And then they came out. Michelle first. Her face looked carved from stone, pale beneath her makeup, jaw clenched so tight her earrings didn't move when she shook her head. Craig followed, mouth still flapping, gesturing with sharp, bird-like motions, as if the act of talking could make what he'd just seen less real. They didn't see me across the street. But I saw everything. Michelle got into the car first. Slammed the door. Craig stood outside for a minute, pacing, phone already to his ear. I imagined a conversation. There has to be some kind of legal recourse. It's slander. It's public defamation. We didn't sign off on this. I smiled. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. I didn't answer. Michelle left a voicemail. Dad, call me. Please. The voice wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something worse, uncertain. Shaken. I let it sit for a few hours before finally calling her back. She picked up on the first ring. What the hell is going on? She snapped. I leaned back in my chair. Good morning to you too, sweetheart. Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know. Know what? Don't play dumb with me, Dad. We went to a gallery last night. A gallery, for God's sake. There are paintings of us. Me. Craig. Brian. You made us into freaks. No, I said, calmly. I made you into reflections. There was silence on the line. A sharp, stunned kind of silence. What does that even mean? She finally whispered. It means I didn't paint you how you see yourselves. I painted you how you are. She hung up. By noon, Craig had called me twice. Left a voicemail threatening serious consequences. Brian texted me once, you need to take this shit down before it ruins everything. I didn't reply. That evening, Tessa showed up at the door, breathless. You need to see this. She pulled out her phone, showed me a video. Someone had recorded Craig yelling at a gallery attendant the night before, demanding they take the paintings down before he called his lawyers. The attendant stayed calm, explained they were part of a contractually agreed-upon exhibit by an anonymous artist. Craig threatened again. I know who Lazarus is. The attendant didn't blink. We don't. And even if we did, it wouldn't matter. The work speaks for itself. The clip ended with Craig storming out while another guest muttered, God, I knew that guy looked familiar. He's even worse in real life. The video had over 500,000 views. And the comments? Brutal. Imagine seeing a painting of your soul and calling it slander. The fact that they're this mad proves Lazarus got it right. You can't sue a mirror for showing your reflection. Whoever Lazarus is, I want to shake his damn hand. That night, every painting from the exhibit was posted online. Official gallery photos, with lighting and detail, uploaded by the gallery's social media account. Each piece had thousands of likes within hours. Art blogs picked it up. Then culture sites. Then mainstream media. By morning, I was everywhere. The Lazarus exhibition, a brutal mirror of the American family. Critics and fans agree, this is the most honest art show of the decade. Who is Lazarus? And why are so many people afraid of him? They wanted to interview me. Everyone did. I ignored most of them. But I granted one. A podcast run by a soft-spoken man named Juno who called my work a reclamation of dignity from the shadows of familial performance. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't need to. He asked what I meant by each piece. What I felt. And at the end, he asked one last question. What do you say to the people who think your work is too personal? Too cruel? I didn't hesitate. I only painted what was already there. That quote took off. Got printed on shirts. Used in memes. Stuck under portraits of fake smiles and over-the-top Christmas photos. My family, meanwhile, was losing their minds. Michelle's social media accounts were bombarded. Brian's firm allegedly asked him to lie low. Craig tried to sue the gallery and was laughed out of the room. They were exposed, not by name, but by essence. And everyone knew it. They had never been so quiet. Tessa told me they were referred to in online circles now as the Lazarus family. Not lovingly. I sat in my studio, surrounded by the original canvases I hadn't sold, and took a deep breath. I felt no guilt. No regret. Only peace. I had lived my entire life trying to be the man they wanted me to be. Mild, quiet. Useful. But Lazarus? Lazarus didn't ask permission. Lazarus didn't apologize. Lazarus told the truth. And the world was finally listening. It's strange how quickly silence can become noise. For most of my life, I lived in the quiet. The dull hum of a welding torch. The scrape of a rake across dead leaves. The rustle of Linda's footsteps down the hallway, always a half-beat faster than mine. After she passed, the silence became heavier, like it had weight, mass, a presence all its own. But now. Now the world wouldn't shut up. I woke to emails stacked like bricks. Journalists from every angle, arts and culture, psychology, even politics, wanted quotes. Galleries wanted more. Collectors waved money around like flypaper, hoping I'd stick. They all wanted a piece of Lazarus, this ghost I'd stitched together from pain and pigment. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding behind the name. I was Lazarus. The man they forgot. The father they ignored. The husband they buried next to his wife even though he was still breathing. And the man who came back. Tessa had to shut down the Lazarus inbox twice in 1 week. It's unmanageable, she said, hair tied back in a messy bun, eyes wide with disbelief. We need a team. Or a manager. Something. I don't want handlers, I told her. I want space. Too late for that, she replied, holding up her phone. They just called you, the American Goya. I snorted. Let's not insult Goya. But the comparisons kept coming. Not just to Goya, but to Bacon, Seville, even Otto Dix. Critics called the work a scream in oil and canvas, a purging of generational rot, the rawest indictment of middle-class performance art ever put in frame. And then came the backlash. Naturally. Some called it cruel. Others called it exploitative. A few, family advocacy, groups claimed the paintings glamorized domestic trauma. I got letters, actual, physical letters, telling me I was a danger to moral family values and a bitter old man trying to poison his legacy. One even ended with, "You're why your children don't love you." That one made me laugh out loud. Because here's the truth, they didn't love me before the paintings. They tolerated me. Patronized me. Used me like a walking guilt sponge. Now, at least, they feared me. There's a kind of power in that. I gave only one formal interview. It wasn't live, wasn't televised. A long-form piece with a print magazine known for in-depth profiles, artists, architects, thinkers. The journalist's name was Marla. She was quiet, sharp, and never once asked me to pose. She just listened. She asked about Linda. About the painting I did of her, the one I never posted online. The one that stayed hung in the studio, above the corner where her old sewing machine used to sit. She believed in your art, Marla said. I nodded. She believed in me. Do you think she'd be proud of all this? I didn't answer right away. I looked at the floor, the scuffed paint, the place where her thimble once rolled away and we never found it. I think, I said, she'd be glad I finally found my voice. Marla was the one who titled the piece, Lazarus, a resurrection in oil and silence. When it published, the gallery had to triple their security. The waiting list to buy even a print was 4 months long. Universities emailed asking for guest lectures. A major museum offered to license the entire series as a traveling exhibit on modern emotional realism. And through it all, I remained anonymous. Mostly. People speculated. Theories swirled. A few guessed I was a retired teacher. One thought I was an AI-generated hoax. Some claimed Lazarus was a collective, a group of painters working under one name to protect their identities. But none of them guessed it was just me. Walter. The man who couldn't get his daughter to return his calls 2 years ago. The man who sat alone in a house full of ghosts, painting shadows no one wanted to acknowledge. That's what made the next part inevitable. The family didn't just call. They showed up. It was a Saturday morning when Michelle knocked on the door. No warning. Just the sound of her knuckles against wood, sharp and impatient, like she was still the one in control. I opened the door. Her face was thinner than I remembered. Stress. Shame. I didn't ask. We need to talk, she said. I didn't invite her in. Just stepped outside onto the porch. Craig sat in the car, sunglasses on, jaw tight. Michelle shifted on her feet. You humiliated us. I didn't reply. She blinked hard. Brian's losing clients. Craig's under review at the firm. People send us pictures, Dad. They call us monsters. I raised an eyebrow. And we didn't deserve this. I chuckled. Actually chuckled. No. Then why did you recognize yourselves? She froze. For the first time since she was a teenager, Michelle had nothing to say. Do you know how many strangers wrote me? I continued. Telling me they saw their families in my work. Their parents. Their children. Their spouses. They didn't even know my name, but they knew the story. She crossed her arms. So that makes it okay? Airing dirty laundry for applause? It's not applause I'm after, I said quietly. It's truth. Her voice dropped. You need to stop. Take it down. Walk away. I looked at her, really looked at her. Not the woman she played in public, but the girl who once asked me to paint her as a fairy when she was 7, wings and all. I already walked away, I said. Years ago. When none of you saw me anymore. She turned without another word. The car door slammed. The engine roared. I stood there long after they drove off, the wind rattling the empty porch chair beside me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that they hadn't come to reconcile. They'd come to reclaim the narrative. But the paint was dry. And the world already had the truth. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the heavy, grief-soaked quiet that had followed Linda's passing. It wasn't the suffocating stillness of isolation I'd lived in for years after my children stopped needing me. No, this silence had tension in it. Purpose. Like the calm that settles just before lightning strikes. They didn't call anymore. After that confrontation on the porch, Michelle went completely dark. No texts. No emails. Even Craig's passive-aggressive legal threats evaporated. I imagined the family meetings, whispers around their sleek kitchen island, strategizing like generals facing an invisible war. What do we do about Dad? Do we go public? What if someone finds out it's us? But they knew the truth, they couldn't touch me. Not without confirming everything. Tessa came by less frequently now, not out of disinterest, but respect. She knew I needed space. The gallery had offered a second showing, a retrospective, maybe even a tour. I told them I'd think about it. I wasn't sure yet. The storm had passed, and I wasn't in a hurry to stir it up again. But something inside me still wasn't finished. The studio had become something else. Not a battleground. Not a sanctuary. Something in between. It felt like standing inside my own ribcage. Each painting a memory muscle, each wall lined with truths I'd never dared to speak aloud. I'd aired my ghosts. Dragged them into the light. But what about me? I'd painted them all, Michelle's mirror smile, Craig's dollar suit, Brian's phone-faced detachment. Even Linda had a canvas, though I kept hers private, soft and aching with blues and golds. But I hadn't painted myself. Not truly. Not yet. So I started. I stretched a fresh canvas. The biggest one yet. It was hard, physically. My back ached. My hands trembled sometimes when I held the brush too long. But I worked through it. Every day for 2 weeks, I painted. Not just me sitting in a chair, or gazing out a window. I didn't want realism. I wanted truth. The same brutal honesty I gave everyone else. I painted a figure hunched over, spine warped like a question mark, ribcage visible under cracked skin. The head was tilted back, mouth open, not screaming, but exhaling. From the mouth poured ribbons of paint, each color tied to a canvas behind him. Reds, greens, yellows. Every memory I'd painted before was being released, not as bile, but as breath. The figure wasn't broken. He was becoming. Around him rose shapes, abstract, angular, towering like cathedral arches. Not prisons. Not homes. Something else. A shrine, maybe. A monument. I titled it, Resurrected. When I finished, I stared at it for hours. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was final. Tessa cried when she saw it. She didn't try to explain why. She just sat on the floor and wept, quietly. When she looked up at me, I nodded. "That's the last one," I said. She nodded back. The next day, I called each of my children. Not to apologize. Not to argue. To let them know. "I'm done painting," I said. Michelle didn't answer. She sent a one-line text. "That's probably for the best." Brian was more diplomatic. "Good to hear, Dad. I hope this means we can finally move forward." Craig didn't respond at all. And I realized something as I hung up the phone. They weren't mad because I lied. They were mad because I told the truth, and the world believed me. They weren't victims. They were uncomfortable. Exposed. And exposure is unforgivable when you've built your entire identity on image. I didn't expect reconciliation. And I didn't want it. You can't reconcile with people who only see you as a mirror, and hate what's reflected back. But I didn't feel hatred anymore. I didn't even feel anger. I felt free. The house was still quiet. The porch still creaked. The hedges were still overgrown. But now, when I walked from room to room, I didn't feel like a ghost. I didn't feel like someone pacing through his own obituary. I felt present. Alive. I began donating pieces. Not to museums, not to collectors, but to small studios, youth centers, art schools. I gave Tessa full control of the process. She found places where the work mattered, where it could teach, where it wouldn't just hang behind glass but spark conversation. I included handwritten notes with each one. Paint even when it hurts. Silence is not the same as peace. Art doesn't forgive, but it remembers. I didn't sign them, Walter. I signed them, Lazarus. One evening, as I watched the sun bleed gold across the studio floor, I stood before, resurrected, one last time. I didn't need applause. Or forgiveness. I had given the world my truth, ugly and beautiful and bleeding. And now it was theirs.